I'm with Mathew Hopkinson from the local data company. Mathew, this morning you've published some really interesting research regarding retail vacancy rates, which shows that the vacancy rate across town centres across the UK has remained stubbornly high at 14.2%. I mean, what do you think the reasons for this are?
We've got the fact we've got this incredibly low consumer spend and confidence, but also we've gone from 0 to nearly 12% of online sales, which had a big impact. And then we've seen the growth of supermarkets, particularly into non-food retail. So at the end of the day, we really have too many shops for modern retailing habits as well as consumer spend.
And obviously we've had a lot of retail failures already at the beginning of 2013. What do you think 2013 has in store?
I think 2013 is going to be very challenging because we know these large chain retailers are drawing down into fewer, larger locations. But also there's a lot of preference for out-of-town locations and these large mega shopping centres, which leaves your average high street with a big challenge. And actually the independent retailers, who are 60% of everything else out there, having to prop it up while a lot of these chains desert to go to bigger places or out of town.
I'm with Paul Turner-Mitchell from 2510 Fashion Boutique up in Rochdale. Paul, what's the situation like up in Rochdale at the moment on the retail front?
Well, Rochdale, in terms of vacancy rates, is actually just slightly below the northwest average, but it's a tough, challenging climate really locally because obviously, you know, the depressed consumer spend, we have high levels of unemployment, you know, a lot of people on benefits, but in Greater Manchester itself is really struggling. If you look at the reports today, you've got Oldham, Altrincham, you've got Stockport, all in the worst performers, and the northwest is one of the worst performing regions. And you have to ask yourself why. There's a lot of factors, but when you're looking at how to address that, what you've got to bear in mind in Greater Manchester, that the local authorities, you know, are being faced with over £1 billion worth of budget cuts that they've got to implement. So when you look at some of the recommendations by Mary Portas in the government review, that throws everything back at the councils to do and to implement. Financially, they can't implement it, and if they do, it's going to be at the sake of adult care, etc., and things like that, which isn't going to be sellable locally. So, you know, the figures do show a real north-south divide, and a lot of everything seems to be London-centric, and we need to address the regions more, and we need to look at, you know, how we can improve, especially the northwest, you know, quite quickly.
Okay, so with the Portas review having been done the year before last
Yeah.
now, what needs to be done now to take this forward and to address these issues?
Well, the Portas report, to my mind, is a good report. The problem with it is, in isolation, it won't work. Yeah. What it needs to do is supplement more meaningful structural changes to the high street. And if both are in tandem, then we will get some success.
So what in particular would you then call on the government to start addressing, and how should they be tackling this?
Well, one of the biggest issues facing the high street has to be business rates. And the government are obviously, you know, pressing ahead with a 2.6% increase in April, you know, on the back of a 20-year high increase last April. That's not the way of tackling the high street. You know, they've called on, you know, local councils to freeze council tax up and down the country, and retailers are calling for a freeze too. But one of the biggest problems that's going to affect retail and is going to have an adverse effect is that the postponement of the 2015 revaluations, which realign property values to what they are worth today rather than at the all-time market high. And if we don't do that, the regions, especially the north, are going to suffer even more, because what you're going to have is places like Oldham, Stockport, Altrincham that are all faring very badly at the moment, subsidising Bond Street in London, and it's ridiculous. That is an unfair system of taxation.
CVAs has also been a big issue over the last year or so. Do you think we'll see more of those as a way of trying to keep companies kind of on the high street, but also getting the concessions that they need?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because at the moment we're all talking about administrations because of what we saw in January and then earlier this month. But wind the clock back a few months, and everyone was talking about CVAs with Travelodge and with Fitness First. Everybody thought that there was going to be a wave of CVAs and they were going to take over the world. But that's gone quiet again. I think CVAs are definitely going to stick around. We're going to see more of them. But you know, there are different considerations, I think, for a CVA. I think it has to be kind of more of a salvageable business. I think the problem with Jessops and Blockbuster and the like, there's a less obviously salvageable business, and a CVA is kind of a bit of a short-term sticking plaster, where all of you're doing in the classic sort of CVA model is just reducing a few stores and reducing a few rents for a short period of time. That's why we saw a number of CVA failures. JJB failed, Blacks failed, Focus DIY fails. So I think maybe some of the confidence has gone from CVAs, but I'm sure we'll see more of them.
I'm with Ben Dowd, Business Director at O2. Ben, obviously we've had some tough figures released today with the vacancy rate still stubbornly high at 14.2% across the UK. I mean, what's your view of the UK high street and shopping centres at the moment? So you've got a keen eye with the big portfolio that you've got.
Exactly. I think first of all it's good news that the numbers have gone down, albeit by 0.1%. So that's good news. I think the numbers are starting to look quite polarised. So I think there's only 4 regions across the UK that have actually showed improvement in the shop vacancy rates. And obviously London is a big part of that. That seems to operate in a slightly different ecosystem to the rest of the UK. I think certain regions, the numbers are very worrying, in particular the North East, for example, which seems to be getting worse. So I think it's a worrying trend. I think when we look at retail and in our industry, it's challenging. And basically what retailers have to do, they've got to try to create that differentiation to drive the footfall in over and beyond the price and the product. So they've got to create the theatre in store, they've got to create the wow factor, and they've got to create that loyalty so that customers come back again.
Okay, and presumably it's not just down to the retailer as well. The government needs to help out and to be there and provide support. What do you think, what would you call on them to do to support retailers at the moment?
So I think they've got a big role to play, and if I think of organisations like the Open Data Institute that have been created by the government, and the potential opportunity that could exist there for local government in terms of the data in regions and working with large organisations to help small and large businesses flourish. I think there's a lot of data available in the UK marketplace. The challenge is around putting it into information that retailers can use to create a competitive advantage for themselves. So I think that whole area of big data and analytics is going to be a growing market. And I think what retailers have to do is to embrace those partnerships and those businesses that can actually help them reach customers in a different way.
Okay, and you were saying that retailers need to create more theatre and create the experience in store. With that in mind, what do you think the high street and shopping centres of 2020 are going to look like? How's it going to differ and how's it need to change?
So I think technology will change. 4G networks, for example, in the mobile space will mean, I can see a lot more pop-up retail shops existing in the coming years. Because you've got that resilience around the connectivity and the speed around the connectivity. Clearly 4G networks will also help the resilience of shops on the high street, but also with the proliferation of smartphones and tablets, clearly now people are connected all the time.
I'm with Roberta Blackman, who's the Shadow Planning Minister and also MP for Durham City. Can you explain to us a little bit about what the situation is like for retail, particularly in Durham at the moment?
Well, in Durham, like a number of areas of the country, particularly the north, it is being hit very hard. And I know some of the figures that have been released today sort of superficially seem to suggest that things are sort of flatlining for retail. But my concern is that there are pockets where we're seeing vacancy rates still rise, particularly in the West Midlands and the north. And I think these areas really need to be addressed.
And with that in mind, your kind of particular knowledge on Durham, so what are you calling on the government to start addressing now? What do you think they really need to be focusing on?
I think the real issue is they need to try and decide for the next year, in particular, whether this trend of reduction in retail is going to continue, and all the information would suggest that it is. And then I think bring forward real policies for diversification. I've been talking to a number of people in the sector who say that really we need to be thinking about different uses for some bits of our shopping centres, and we need to be thinking more about leisure in our town centres, and really starting to reconceptualise our high street so it isn't only a shopping experience, that we also have a number of community facilities being addressed. So it's more places that people want to be and to be able to have a good cultural experience as well as shop.